Welcome to the Just Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Aiko Schaefer, Executive Director of Just Solutions. In today's episode, we will explore nuclear energy in addressing the climate crisis and discuss the implications for environmental justice. I'm joined today by Arjun Makhijani, President of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. He's a recognized authority on energy and an author of numerous books and reports on energy and environment-related issues. From a climate justice point of view, nuclear power is contrary to equity in energy justice because it is centralized energy source, it's controlled and benefits a few. So Arjun, how does it foster environmental injustice?
Well, nuclear is probably in many ways the most unjust and undemocratic energy source. It's inherently inequitable in a number of ways. So when you split the atom to generate nuclear energy, you create fission products, the pieces of the atom. Most of those pieces are pretty radioactive. Some of them last for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and even millions of years, like iodine-129. Iodine goes to the thyroid, has a half-life of 16 million years about. Every large standardized reactor of today creates about 30 bombs worth of plutonium each year. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. So we're basically saying to future generations, we're going to consume the electricity, you live with the waste. Nobody's got a very good solution to this waste problem. So that's a grotesque intergenerational inequity. Then it's demographically inequitable in today's population. So the people who live today, the uranium, which is the raw material for nuclear energy, is the only natural raw material that can actually, if refined, sustain a chain reaction. So where the uranium comes from is largely in indigenous lands in the global south. And even when it comes from Canada or when it has come from the United States or Australia, so countries of the global north, politically speaking, it's largely from indigenous lands. Here, the Navajo a nation has many, many abandoned mines and a legacy of terrible cancer and pollution from uranium mining. So there's that real environmental injustice. If you look at the global south and the places where the uranium comes from, most of these places do not have nuclear power. So even within the present generation, the people who are suffering the pollution, they're not benefiting from the electricity particularly, and most of them are not benefiting at all. Like Niger, which supplies in Africa, which supplies most of the uranium to France, they have no nuclear energy. Congo, where the original uranium came from, have no nuclear energy. Namibia has no nuclear energy, and so on. The other thing is the same uranium is raw material for bombs, and the same uranium is raw material for nuclear power. In the 50s and 60s, the countries that had nuclear weapons kind of made a deal with each other. We're the only ones that will legally have nuclear weapons. We promise to discuss getting rid of them, but just discuss negotiations. And everybody else, if they want to benefit from nuclear energy, should forswear bombs. The exhibit A of that is the U.S. conflict with Iran. It's all around whether Iran is going to use its nuclear facilities to make weapons, even though the same technologies for bombs. So it's sort of a nuclear apartheid. The Indians used to call it nuclear apartheid, but after the Indians got the bomb, the Indian government stopped calling it nuclear apartheid. I call it plutonium scrubbed white. Apartheid went away when you got bombs. So nuclear technology, because it can give bombs and power, that technology has to be controlled. It has to be inspected. It's sort of basically in the control of government. And then the government makes a deal with corporations and they all guard it basically. So it's government and corporations guarding this technology from the public. And the public does have some say in terms of proceedings and, filing, being an intervener and all that. But really, because nuclear energy is about bombs and fission products and plutonium, it is a highly, highly controlled and undemocratic technology ever since the Manhattan Project.
Well, given everything that you shared about the historic challenges and the complexities of nuclear power, the argument still is that nuclear power is needed to address the climate crisis. So, can nuclear deliver climate benefits in time and safely to meet the urgent need?
So let's set aside safely even. If it were cheap and fast, there would be an argument for it. But it's neither cheap nor fast. In the last 15 years, we've been talking about the nuclear renaissance, and the generation from new reactors has been zero. It's taken 10, 15 years to build a power plant, and it just takes too long. So even now, when everybody's touting nuclear power and the government is putting a lot of money because Wall Street doesn't want to put in, the earliest date for which a new reactor is announced in the United States is 2028, 2029. Now, that particular reactor has been in the making since the 2000s. They had said one would be ready in the middle of the last decade, but they didn't even get reactor certification until 2020, and that certification process is not even complete. Most recently, just in the last couple of weeks, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has said, you have this application for certification, but we find there are quite a lot of problems in it. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And I had a long list of problems. Now, in the meantime, we have announced a climate emergency. Read the speech of the UN Secretary General about the kind of crisis we're in. And it is not even proposed to build a significant amount of nuclear power for the next 10, 12 years. We need to reduce carbon emissions by 50%, I think 60% in the next 10 years. So if we don't even make a beginning, and we're not even sure these reactors are going to work properly, there are so many questions, even from a fairly corporate-friendly regulatory agency, in my opinion. It's just too little, too late. And in the meantime, we have cheap solar energy. Even when you add batteries, the cost of solar plus batteries is less than half of Wall Street estimate of nuclear cost. And they're generally higher than what they estimate nuclear cost. So it's too little, too late, and government throwing money at this problem is not going to magically cause reactors to be built. So it's not a solution, and actually may give a false hope that we're going to have all this nuclear power in the 2030s. It's going to be the core of the energy system. There are utilities talking that way. They have what I would call pie in the sky plans to build loads of reactors in the 2030s and 40s, but nothing now. I don't think that's a serious way to address the climate crisis. Nothing now is not a good answer. We need to do 50% of CO2 in this decade. And for that, we need to do 60 or 70% of electricity decarbonization in the next 10 years. So nothing now means we shouldn't go for that solution. Leaving aside all the plutonium and the waste and the inequity and the environmental injustice is not even a sensible thing to pursue for climate reasons.
There is a resurgence of interest and investments in nuclear power as a solution to the climate crisis. Yet there haven't been any new reactors completed in over a quarter century. Why did people stop wanting to order nuclear reactors after the rush of the 1960s and 70s? Arjun, can you tell us what happened?
Aiko, there were three broad reasons. The first was in the 60s and 70s, all utilities were regulated. That meant there were public service commissions that guaranteed them a rate of return on their investments. The bigger their investments, the more profit they made. And so they had essentially no risk. People thought nuclear power reactors might be expensive when they were started being built in the 50s. But the utilities went along. It was a government program to promote nuclear energy, part of the Cold War back then. And so the utilities started building them. General Electric and Westinghouse, that were the reactor builders, wanted to make a lot of money. They'd already designed some reactors for the Navy. And so there was a rush of orders. But then problems started to pop up with safety first. The Atomic Energy Commission, which was in charge of safety, had been doing some experiments in Oak Ridge in Idaho that indicated problems with the cooling system. There was a sort of a cover-up, but then it came out and there was a big scandal in the early 70s and hearings that showed they weren't paying attention to safety. And then 3 Mile Island happened in 79, a meltdown. It was only a 3-month-old reactor, and Wall Street thought, goodness, here's $1 billion, give or take, down the tubes, only 3 months old. And so in the 80s, these things came together, the high cost, the safety, the retrofits, and Wall Street started to sour on nuclear reactors. There was a big bond default. So in the early days, municipal bonds and utility bonds were like federally guaranteed money in the bank. But there were 5 reactors being built in Washington State, Washington Public Power Supply System. It came to be called WPS. And only one of those reactors was eventually completed. There was a big bond default, and a lot of people lost billions of dollars back then, billions of dollars of the early 80s. That might be like 10 billion today. So Wall Street soured on nuclear power. That was a very big thing. In 1985, Forbes ran a cover story that called nuclear power the greatest managerial disaster in business history. So that was 2 things. They were guaranteed a rate of return. They jumped in, no problem, no risk. The economists call it moral hazard. You don't pay any price for a risk you take. Safety, 3 Mile Island, tightening of rules, high costs. And then there was cheap natural gas. So by the time the 90s come around, electricity growth has tapered off. There are lots of reactors that were unordered that were canceled. Only about half of them that were ordered were built. And natural gas became very cheap. Nuclear could not compete. Even regulated utilities did not want to build nuclear power plants. That's why the industry for new reactors fell apart in the 1990s.
And Arjun, given that we're falling back on nuclear energy at a pretty significant level as a climate solution, have these problems been addressed?
Well, the industry thought they had addressed them. You know, they always kind of fall on the mantra of, oh, we're overregulated, every reactor is looked over too many times. Let's simplify regulation. Let's standardize the designs. And once we do that, it'll be fine. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said, okay, we'll simplify licensing. We'll have a one-stop licensing process. We'll have standardized designs. They were certified in the first decade of the 2000s when climate came to the fore as a big concern first in Washington. A nuclear renaissance was announced. They said nuclear, low carbon, it'll be a big solution. And 34 reactor projects were announced. Government said, we'll give you loan guarantees, simplified, but it all fell apart. So that was the wrong diagnosis of the problem. The right diagnosis of the problem is that nuclear could not compete. It took too long. The reactors were too big. And Wall Street did not want to fund nuclear power. The nuclear industry actually went to Wall Street and said, we're going to have this renaissance. Will you fund it? Can we raise money in New York? And New York and Wall Street said no. So basically the government said, we'll give you loan guarantees, but it didn't work. The industry failed to learn its lessons. Nuclear power takes too long to make. It's too costly. And in the meantime, you're churning out carbon dioxide from fossil power plants.
Thanks to our listeners for joining us on the Just Solutions podcast. If you want to know more about our work at Just Solutions, visit our website at www.justsolutionscollective.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for the latest updates. Today, we are driving community-created and equity-centered solutions to the climate crisis. We hope you will join us for our next episode.